Welcome back to Portrait of an Editor. I am Francis Lombard. At the beginning of 2025, I mentioned wanting to see the return of Greg Rucka and Michael Lark's Lazarus. Well, 2025 finally delivered something good for a change. Lazarus is back, and its editor, Alejandro Arbona, is here to talk about one of the best comic books Image Comics has ever published. Also, we talk about the breathtaking horror one-shot Alejandro wrote, Lake Yellowwood Slaughter. Goat's Flying Press is its publisher, and you can find a link to the Kickstarter campaign in the show notes. Before we roll tape, some housekeeping. The past 50 or so episodes are now available for free on YouTube. When you arrive, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Reminder, there is a Portrait of an Editor Patreon page where you can find older interviews. Check it out for $1 a month. Now here's my conversation with Alejandro Arbona. Enjoy. So, Alejandro, welcome back to Portrait of an Editor. Before we started recording, we were trying to figure out the last time I had you on. I know a big amount of our conversation was about the comic that we were writing. Also was Dr. Tomorrow. That's the one I remember. I know we talked about editing too, because you've been editing, and I think I met you briefly at one of the last New York Comic Cons I went to. So welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Francis.
You're welcome. I'll be honest, I am really excited to talk about Lazarus because I don't know, anybody who's listening has known that at the beginning of this year, I mentioned that I was really hoping this book would come back. It's been a while. I knew they were taking time off just to get the book, ready to avoid some of the deadline issues and missed deadlines that has plagued the series, which personally I have never had a problem with because the quality of the series has never wavered, and I can just wait. I have other things going on in life that I'm just, I love Lazarus. It's probably for the last 10 years been one of my favorite series. And I just so happy. I think after I published that podcast at the beginning of this year, I saw the solicitation for issue 1. What is it? Lazarus Fallen? First thing, also, you have another series, book that just wrapped up its Kickstarter that people can still order with Flying Goat Press.
Goats Flying Press.
I'm sorry, Goat's Flying Press. Sebastian is going to kill me now, so I'll try to edit that out. But Goat's Flying Press.
It happens a lot, actually. He's used to it. It happens a lot. It always appears that way in the beat.
Awesome.
Yeah, Heidi is always calling it Flying Goat's Press.
So, why don't we talk about that? I don't want to give anything away. I've looked at the pages; they are spectacular. I tried to avoid reading it and skipped around because I took part in the Kickstarter and looking forward to it. It's glad to see that the book is so far along. So I'm really looking forward to it. But do you want to let's just talk briefly about it, because people still can go and take part in the Kickstarter, right? Is that correct? It's not closed out. You can go and purchase stuff,
yes.
Right?
So yeah. So yes, as you were mentioning, I'm here in my capacity as an editor, since this is an editing podcast, and I edit all these comics with Greg Rucka, including Lazarus Fallen. But you are referring to a graphic novel that I just wrote. It's called Lake Yellowwood Slaughter, which is a tongue-in-cheek. It's a quote-unquote graphic novel adaptation, tongue-in-cheek, of a 1983 slasher movie that never actually existed. So it's a completely original twist on a slasher movie. And we did a Kickstarter. The publisher was Goats Flying Press, which is Sebastian Gerner. We did a Kickstarter that ran for a month from May through June. The Kickstarter ended on Friday, June 13th. Of course, Friday the 13th. And but it's still open for late pledges, so people can still go check it out. I'll give you a link if you want to put it in the show notes or anything.
Sure. Yeah,
people
definitely
can still check it out and get copies until we do fulfillment. And as you were alluding, the book is fully written. It's already fully drawn. We're expecting to finish colors any day now. It's a 90-page graphic novel plus with some bonus material. So it's something like 100 something page book, hardcover. It's It's fully drawn and lettered. We're finishing coloring any day now. And we should be sending it to the printer in July, and then turnaround from the printer is pretty fast. So we're expecting to do fulfillment by like September, October.
Oh,
So
nice.
the book is very close to coming out, right in time for horror movie season. We're very excited about that.
Now, are some of the extra pages the alternate ending that never was screened in the US? I
Yes,
okay.
yes.
I
So
hope I
one of
didn't
the
see
stretch
those.
goals,
Yes.
the so so the gag here, as I mentioned, is that it's a comic book adaptation of a movie that never existed. I wanted to do it that way because I'm obsessed with these old, in the 80s and in the 90s. There were these like Marvel Comics, DC Comics adaptations of extremely violent movies,
Hmm.
which was always so funny to me because a movie would be rated R, but then Marvel or DC would put out an adaptation that would be approved by the Comics Code authority for all ages or whatever. So you would have the RoboCop movie adaptation or a Nightmare on Elm Street adaptation or a Darkman adaptation that would have this kind of sanitized violence and no swearing. So we approach the book that way where it's an adaptation of a movie. It's a fake adaptation of a fake movie. And not only that, to take it one more level beyond, it's an American slasher movie made by an Italian director, a director
Which,
of giallo movies, which are
yes.
like the Italian genre of thriller, slasher, murder mysteries. And in the headcanon of this book, one of the conceits that we came up with is that the Italian director wanted to do a kind of a downer ending, the kind of ending you would often see in giallo movies.
Hmm.
And the American producer said no way and made him give it a proper ending, a more uplifting ending. So the book has one ending that you read, and then as a sort of a special feature, like a DVD bonus, or at the end of the VHS tape, we have another 6-page sequence featuring the quote unquote original ending, the Italian ending. And that was a stretch goal that we included in the Kickstarter, that if we got up to a certain amount, I forget what number stretch goal that was, but if we got to a certain amount of funding, we would include this alternate ending, and we did it. We made it. So
Yeah, you
that's going
guys,
in there as well.
you made a lot of the stretch goals. I mean, it's not it went from a soft cover to a hard cover.
Yeah,
When
well, we initially set the funding goal relatively low. We deliberately set the funding goal at the amount that we needed to be able to print the book because
yeah.
that was like that was the goal. I financed this book out of my own pocket, soup to nuts, and there was simply no money. I could not afford to print it and ship it because that is another huge expense on top of producing the book. So we did the Kickstarter basically just to pay for printing and shipping. So we kept the funding goal to $8,000, which would have been the amount to cover that. But then that also gave us a lot of room to stretch out into like add-ons and bonuses. And so then we could, really revel in, like, we upgrade, it was going to be a soft cover, we upgraded to a hard cover. Later we upgraded to spot glass. We put in the alternate ending. We're doing an original soundtrack consisting of two tracks, but an original soundtrack on cassette
I know.
of the movie itself, of the fictional 1983 movie, with two pieces of music composed for the book by a musician named Catherine Dwyer, who's from a band called Remember Sports, kind of a beloved little gem of a uh, indie rock band. So yeah, Catherine Dwyer of Remember Sports contributed two tracks to a soundtrack that's going to be, side A and B of a cassette. And of course, most people don't have cassette players. So if anyone gets that add-on, it also comes with a digital download.
Oh, it does. Oh, that's cheating. There's going to be some people who appreciate these kind of movies. I mean, I grew up with those. Seeing Friday the 13th for the first
I,
time at a drive-in
I
and
mean,
stuff like that.
but simply having a cassette is so cool. Like we're
Yeah, I know.
me and Sebastian, we are so excited to have like a cassette with a little J fold or whatever they call the little sleeve.
Hmm. Hmm.
You have to
Yep.
design a little J-shaped gatefold for the cover and the label, and we're really excited. We can't wait. The cassette itself is yellow, in keeping with the Yellowwood theme and the Giallo of it all. So yeah, it's going to be a little yellow cassette with the cover art, and we're very excited. We can't wait to see it. We just got the tracks in. We're sending them out now to, I guess, I don't know what you call it, master the cassettes.
The
They actually make the cassettes. Yeah, that's
oh
all
wow.
going into production now.
So how long did it take to find somebody who could make cassettes? I mean, I know albums have made a comeback over the well, a bunch of years, but cassettes have never really been the pinnacle of sound quality, ever.
Well, everything we wanted to do for this book, we wanted to do it in a spirit of 1983
Mhm.
because the movie is ostensibly from the movie it's quote unquote based on, which is not real, is ostensibly from 1983. So we wanted to do everything in that vein. Like for example, the cover art in particular, I had
Yeah.
a very distinct vision of what the cover art should look like, which is to say, it should have been painted. Like I knew I didn't want a typical comic book cover. I wanted a cover that would look like a VHS box or a movie poster, or like the cover of a 1980s comic book adaptation.
Hmm.
And I had sort of an idea. It should be painted. It should look like a movie poster. I talked to Gavin. Oh, I should have said much earlier. I'm sorry, but the artist is Gavin Guidry, co-creator, co-owner of the book with me. I spoke with Gavin about the idea for the cover, and he's just straight up was like, "I don't really paint." And so then I started looking around for another artist who could do it with Gavin's blessing. And there was this artist who I was already following on Instagram, Suspiria Vilches, an artist from Spain who lives in Toronto, and her name is Suspiria. So right away, I knew like this woman is going to get it. This woman is going to get Giallo. She's going to get the vibe here. And I had never met her, so I just sort of cold emailed her and said, "I'm interested in commissioning a cover, and this is what it's about." And I told her the idea, and she loved it. And then she absolutely just killed it. Like she nailed it. The cover
Hmm.
is I can't think of another time that I've commissioned something that was so on the money, so perfect, exactly what, she understood the assignment, as the saying goes. Um, so yeah, so we wanted everything to be kind of in that 1983 vein. So then really, really early on in the process, when Sebastian and I were just spitballing like what we could do for the project, one idea we had early on was like, oh, we could make VHS tapes as a stretch goal, but then we were like, what are we going to put on a VHS tape? We don't have the resources to go shoot a short film or anything. And we talked about maybe we could do like some kind of bonus material commentary, something like that. But that was a bridge too far. But then at one point I was like, what's an even wilder idea would be a cassette. And he seized on it immediately. He pounced on it. And again, the question came up like, well, what are we going to put on a cassette though? We don't have the rights to use existing music. Like if we were to use movie soundtrack music, we couldn't legally do that. And Sebastian already knew Catherine Dwyer actually. So he said, let me just ask Catherine, you know, swing, we could try it. It's a swing, but maybe it's worth a try. And he asked her and she was thrilled. She was like, oh my God, synth heavy
Yeah.
summer camp kind of horror movie. Love it. So she jumped right aboard, started working on it. Absolutely. Just really did incredible work. This is the thing I'm the most excited about with this book is that it started with a little idea that I had, and then I started to approach the members of the creative team one by one, and everybody has exceeded. I mean, it's one thing to imagine a book and then see it happen, but to actually see it happen like a dream come true, better than I ever could have imagined it would turn out to be. I'm very excited. I'm very thrilled, as you can tell. I think you can tell from my voice. I'm just
And I,
just
I guess,
feels like in terms of stuff I've written and everything, this feels like a real crowning achievement so far.
well, that's one thing I got from the Kickstarter. It just seemed like uh, everybody loved the project. Everybody was having, oh, thank God, in comics, fun doing this. It came just the material, the emails I received and everything. There was just a sense of, I mean, the subtext was just, you guys are having a blast putting this together. And I've been burnt on Kickstarter before, so I'm a little hesitant at times. But Sebastian, I've known over the years, and you too, and just the team together. I'm like, okay, this is gonna come through, and I can just see everybody's having a lot of fun. The stretch goals are fun. Um, just everything about it, and the genre is just ripe for somebody looking at it in a different way, um, and doing something with it that is beyond just the, your typical what you usually get in that genre, which is, a hunt and kill kind of thing until there's one person around and then, surviving. So, I mean, what I've seen,
Well,
it
there
looks
is
like,
going to be that.
yeah, there is that, and I'm looking forward to it. And I guess that's leading to, on top of the fun, what is it about that genre? I mean, that works for you that you felt, I'm going to put my own time, sweat, and money into this. What is it that, and then you were able to, get all these other people on board with an enthusiasm. The genre is not that deep. Let's put it that way. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, what is it that you feel, that is it old is new again, or is there something about it that movies like these are it's just being fun to be scared, or I don't know, or it's our youth recaptured. I don't know. What do you think it is?
Yeah, I mean, I personally, when I was young, even going back to childhood, when I was young and when I was in my teens, I foolishly thought that I did not like, because I thought that it was like, no, I don't enjoy feeling scared or whatever.
Mhm.
But at the same time, I have to admit that in hindsight, when I was very little, like a single digit age, I used to love staring at the VHS boxes of horror movies at the video store. And I would just be like paralyzed with fascination and terror. You know,
Mhm.
that feeling of like when you're a little kid and you see the VHS box for like Dead Alive or for, I don't know, Evil Dead 2, where it's a skull with an eyeball, like those kinds of things, or just all those kinds of, oh, one that really got to me a lot was, um, what's this movie called? In the Company of Wolves,
Oh,
where
the Company
there
of Wolves.
is
Yeah.
little,
Yep.
yeah, the VHS box is Little Red Riding Hood
Mhm.
with her mouth like like being forced open and a wolf snout coming out of her mouth.
Mhm.
That when I was, I don't know what age, I must have been 6 or 8 or something like that. I was like terrified of that cover, but also eyes glued studying it. And then when I was a teenager, my friends and I went to see In the Mouth of Madness at the theater, and I was so scared watching that movie that I thought I was going to die. I literally thought I was going to die in my movie theater chair. And when we left, my friends and I, we were all like, oh God, that was horrible. That was an awful experience. But then as the years passed, I kept remembering it and being like, man, remember how much fun we had? Remember how great that was when we saw that extremely terrifying movie? So then over time, it kind of dawned on me that, like, no, I really love horror. I actually love horror. And then I've really grown up and embraced it. Finally in my adulthood, I came to this delayed embrace. And I think because I came to it relatively late in life, like I didn't necessarily watch a lot of horror movies as a tween or as a teenager, like many people do, or like most horror fans do. Um, Suddenly in my 20s and 30s, I was like, I need to catch up. There's a lot of stuff I have to get caught up on. So all through my sort of adult life, I've just been watching a lot of horror movies for a long time, and I guess I kind of digested, like slasher movies, Nightmare on Elm Street. I didn't see Texas Chainsaw Massacre until I was about 20. Um, so all of these things I kind of digested with a slightly more discerning, slightly more refined, movie viewing vocabulary than if I had
Mhm.
seen them as a child or as a teen. Um, So I guess that always put me in more of a cerebral approach. At the same time, there are random horror memories that I have from being like 11. Like when I was 11, I had a best friend in school who I used to hang out with at his house a lot, and we used to just watch whatever would come across, whatever was on cable or whatever random VHS tape we found or whatever. And there were scenes in horror movies that I could remember seeing at the age of 11 that I had seared into my mind, but then I never knew what movie they were from. And like I never remembered what movie they were from. So in adulthood, I also had this experience of like rediscovering I would remember a specific scene, and then I would have to find out what movie it was from, and then I would watch the movie and be like, there it is. For
Hmm.
example, I had a memory at the age of 11 of seeing a very, very grotesque scene in a zombie movie. And I had no idea what movie it was. And eventually I figured out, in my 30s, I figured out that it was Zombie, Lucio Fulci's
Oh,
Zombie, aka Zombie Flesh Eaters.
was it the?
Another one was I remembered seeing a movie where a young woman, and I distinctly remembered her outfit, but there was when I was about 11, I saw this thing where a young woman is wearing like a polo shirt and a denim or corduroy mini skirt, and the shirt is pink and the skirt is no, the shirt is yellow and the skirt is pink, and she's being chased at night by a Doberman. And at one point, she gets around a fence and she's relieved because she thinks that she's safe now. And then the Doberman hops over her. It's an 8 foot fence, and the Doberman jumps over it, climbs, half jumps over it, and chases her down. And it's terrifying. And again, for years, I had no idea what movie that was. And eventually, I figured out it is a movie that became one of my favorites, Tenebrae by Dario Argento, one of my favorite Giallo movies.
Oh,
So I had these in my adulthood. I had this kind of like rediscovery of horror. Kind of this I wasn't conversant in it in my youth, and then I kind of rediscovered it as I became an adult. And so all of that came to bear in by the time I was in my 30s, I had become a huge fan of slasher movies and a huge fan of giallo movies, which are a very niche kind of,
hmm.
very specific Italian subgenre. And I was loving all this stuff. And then, I was watching a slasher movie with some friends, and we were joking around. We were watching a summer camp slasher movie. It was Sleepaway Camp 2.
Oh, jeez.
And we were joking around about like, everyone had their sleepaway camp experiences, and they were reminiscing. And then I had this idea where I said, as a joke, imagine a summer camp slasher movie where there's obviously a killer in the woods, ready to start preying on these children. And then the parents are like, oh my God, our first child-free summer in 10 years. We're gonna drink, we're gonna sleep around, we got drugs, we are gonna party. And then the killer goes after them instead,
And
leaves the
this
kids
is
alone. The kids have the summer of a lifetime, but now the parents are the ones getting killed at their lakeside mansions, at their vacation homes. And that was it. That was the genesis of the idea. And of
and
course, then I realized that if you have a summer camp slasher movie, and you literally, if the killer walks away from the summer camp and the teen victims and walks to a set of mansions where wealthy adults are living it up indoors, almost like that, automatically the genre changes from slasher to giallo. Like, it literally, the killer walked from one genre into the other.
I'm very much aware of the Italian movies. I haven't really dived into them, but that genre, the and like zombie, I'm getting a feeling either it's the shark scene or the eye scene in the zombie movie that you remember.
It was the eye scene.
The eye
Yes,
scene,
the eye
okay.
scene.
So I've seen some of the classics. What is it? I mean, I guess the one last question, because I want to make sure we get to Lazarus too, is when you do that, that's a great transition. But what is it that the Italian movies, what do they bring to it? Because everything from the westerns all the way up to zombie movies and the slasher movies and everything, they bring something very different, to it. They bring, for lack of a better term, a level of exploitation that Americans wouldn't even dream of, I guess. How do you see that transition from, slasher movie to Giallo movie?
Well, I'll try to be brief, because I could certainly go on at length about this. So I'll try to keep it really brief. But Giallo movies predate slasher movies by a few years, and they basically influence slasher movies.
Oh, okay.
Giallo movies and slasher movies kind of arguably are both spring from Psycho. Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho kind of inspired both,
Hmm.
or at least that's the way Carol Clover defines it in her book Men, Women, and Chainsaws. In that book, she talks about Halloween and those kinds of final girl movies being spiritual descendants of Psycho, where
Definitely. Definitely.
um, yeah, where with the genre tropes and the final girl thing and the kind of gender fluidity of the killer and things like that. But Giallo movies came along first, and they definitely were a huge inspiration to slasher movies, most notably in the fact that Friday the 13th Part 2 features a kill that is copied directly from Bay of Blood. And then in the very next scene features another kill that is also copied from the very next scene in Bay of Blood.
Oh,
So it's
wow.
two kills in a
Okay.
row.
Oh,
Mario Bava's Bay of Blood. But anyway, um, you were talking about the level of exploitation or kind of a level of extremity. I think that's, I mean, not to overgeneralize, but the U.S. can be a pretty prurient country. Like it's,
mhm.
this is this was a country founded on like religious conservatism. It was
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
the British pilgrims who left the British pilgrims who left England because it was too fast and loose for their uptight religious mores. But this is obviously, and you can see it all around us today, that this is obviously still a very conservative, very Christian, very scandalized nation. And that goes hand in hand with having a fascination with like violence and titillation and all that kind of thing, because it's taboo. But even here, even in the US, slasher movies never get quite as gruesome as Giallo movies can get. There
Mhm.
are Giallo movies that have scenes of violence, especially violence against women, that are so grotesque and so like they really absolutely make you like full body shudder. Like, for example, there's a movie called Torso. It's called Torso in the US. It is a good movie. I like it very much, but it is a very tough movie to watch because it's very brutal. It's directed by the great Sergio Martino, but the movie in the U.S. was called Torso. In Italy, it was called The Body Showed Signs of Sexual Violence. That was the title in Italian.
Wow.
So in Giallo movies, a lot of times there's that kind of extreme like mutilation, like on camera, kind of all sorts of mutilations, and it's really squidgy, really disgusting. No, the US slasher movies never get quite to that level, perhaps for the better. But they are definitely a spiritual descendant. They're definitely Slasher movies are definitely kind of descended from that giallo mold. And then there are certain ways in which they're similar, and there are certain ways in which they are different. One of the ways that they're different is the idea of like in a giallo movie, there's usually an ensemble cast that start to become the victims, and then the killer is usually revealed to be one of the members of that cast. Like somebody in the cast has some kind of motive why they're killing everyone else, and that gets revealed by the end of the movie. In slasher movies, it's very different. In slasher movies, it's like your ensemble cast is purely your victims and your one sole survivor, and then the killer is the killer. And the killer is apart from the cast. Like you've got your entire cast of camp counselors, and then you've got Jason.
Yeah.
And you go into the movie knowing from the beginning who the killer is, because it's obviously going to be, you know,
Except for the
it's Michael Myers. This is a Michael Myers movie, etc. So that's like a key distinction between slashers and giallo. But there is overlap between them. Like the Scream movies are like the modern day take on that's the franchise that like revived slashers in America, right?
yes.
But if you look at them from a level of tropes, the Scream movies are basically giallo, not slasher, because it is every single movie has some kind of reveal of like, here's why I'm really doing this,
Hmm.
and the killer is always revealed to be somebody who's like the friend, that kind of thing. So from a trope level, those are more like giallo. So in this book, I was very interested in like that kind of level of closeness and familiarity, but also difference between genres that I wanted to fool around with. And I also just wanted to do giallo aesthetics, which is like the extreme color and the lighting, dramatic lighting, and that kind of thing. So that's one thing that we approach very deliberately that I think people will see when they read the finished book.
Just to put a cap on it, and anybody's listens to this, they should go check out the Kickstarter. Obviously, you're having a lot of fun with this, and it shows in the finished product too. So, It's not
Yeah,
just
we're
like,
having a blast.
you're not just like, oh, let's have a few kills in 90 pages. No, there's some thoughts behind it. And these movies, as we could spend another hour talking about it. There is something about it, the reasoning behind the kills, how the killer and everything, like, especially now that you bring up Scream, the logic of why we're doing this, or we can talk about Friday the 13th, the first one, where there is sort of an indication that maybe the killer is part of the group or something. It seems like I haven't seen it in a while, but I could see them trying to convince you that maybe we already know we've already met the killer in the movie
Hmm.
because they're using
Hmm.
it from the point of view. I think like Roger Ebert even had an issue with constantly showing, like the murders from the point of view instead of like, oh, the murder from the victim's point of view. And I'm just like, oh, dude, it's just a horror movie. Come on, relax.
Yeah, I
You
mean,
know.
but even before Friday the 13th did that, Halloween did that
Yeah.
before,
Yep.
and Giallo movies did that before too. So that was maybe a novelty in Hollywood, but part of the reason they do that is to hide the identity of the killer. Like this was when the tropes of slasher movies were not as well established and masks were not yet such a big part.
Hmm.
And the twist in Friday the 13th also being that that they make you think it's going to be Jason, or all these years ago Jason died, maybe he's back or whatever, and of course it turns out to be Jason's mom.
Yeah.
So they have to conceal the identity of the killer, and the easiest way to do that is to simply not show you the killer by putting you in the killer's POV,
Yeah. That was a big
among other
upset.
reasons why that's done.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
but
let's
we've evolved from that point.
sure. Yeah, we've moved on. So Lazarus Fallen, and I guess we could spend another hour talking about that. Like I said at the beginning, I'm so happy to see this book again. Michael Lark, I think, put it. I started out doing a comic book and ended up doing a documentary. I think he dropped an
Yeah,
F bomb somewhere in there. It is a book that's been out.
it launched in June of 2013, so
2013
it's
is the
been.
right. I don't know. It is a documentary in a way. It is one of the best comic books ever. You came on board for when they really switched things up, if I'm correct. You've been working, but you came on board when they went to the 64 page or the big quarterly. I think it was more than 64 pages, but
I had started working with Greg in 2016 on a couple of other comics, and then he asked me to take over Lazarus when they rebooted as a miniseries called Lazarus Risen,
Risen.
and
Okay.
those were 64-page issues. It was like 44 pages of comic story with a solid like 15, 20 pages of bonus contents and a prose story, and so we did it that way for a few years. That miniseries ran 7 issues. You mentioned earlier that you're not bothered by the delays between arcs, and
Yeah.
I'm pleased to hear that, but I have to say we are bothered because it's very frustrating. It's very frustrating, and we kind of kick ourselves that it takes this long. Uh, but now we are. It's Endgame now.
Yep.
If people have read Lazarus Risen, they know that ended in a kind of a huge confrontation, which really changes uh, the tenor of things. And now it's kind of outright open conflict between Forever, the protagonist, and her family. And so now we have relaunched as this miniseries, Lazarus Fallen. Um, the first issue just came out as we record this. It just came out yesterday.
Yep.
Um, this is going to run. So to the point about delays, we've been working. It's been about 3 years since the last issue of Lazarus Risen. We've been working on these issues for that entire time. We are very, very far ahead. This is going to run for about 20 issues. And the plan, I mean, you say the word plan and God laughs, but the plan is to release 4 arcs pretty much in a row. I mean, we'll do one arc and then a trade, and then something like a 3 month break, and then the next arc and a trade, and a 3 month break and the next arc. And we're halfway through, and it's looking good. The schedule is holding, so it should be a pretty continuous roller coaster ride from here on out for about 20 issues as we barrel toward the big finale, toward the big ending. Um, it's hard to call it a jumping on point because, as I've said, this is
Yeah, you're
end game now. But
yeah.
it is. I think it's pretty easy to kind of get caught up, and certainly if people are willing to go out and do homework, there are four hardcovers that collect the entire series until now.
Now,
But also we have recap pages. We try to keep everything fairly self-explanatory. Remains to be seen how effective that is, but we try.
at the end of Risen, I mean, at the end of Risen, the last
Spoilers. No, I'm kidding.
no, no, Greg wrote that you guys weren't going to start the final arc until everything was in the can. Now, I read through issue one last night, and I hear that not everything is in the can. I'm trying to
Well,
get to,
that's
well,
overly ambitious. If we were to wait for
yes,
everything to be in the can, we'd be working until 2027
20.
or something like that before we even started putting out. I mean,
Well, the question
it's
I had of
it's
it,
it's generous of Greg to say that, but
mhm.
we don't want people to have to wait that long.
Yeah,
Maybe
exactly. I'm
that was
like, good.
overly idealistic, perhaps.
I said good luck after I read that because I'm like, knowing how much it takes to produce a comic, and it sounded like it was going to be like I think there was a hint that there was going to at least be a dozen issues, not or more, and what you just lined out is almost a 2-year plan. As an editor, in the past 3 years, seeing has there been a deadline that you guys have been working towards, or because I know a deadline is such a thing, a push pull kind of. It can motivate people, it can scare people, but as somebody in charge, as the editor on Lazarus, how did that complicate your job that you didn't have a publishing deadline throughout all this to get up to where you are now? Yeah, I know you guys are ahead. You're way ahead. You're into the already working on, I think, the second arc or onto others, but according to
No,
what
we're on the third arc now.
you are on the third arc, according to what I just read. So how is it's a different approach. So I mean, if you want to just give a
Yeah.
breakdown, that's the thing I'm most curious about, of like, how did you perform your job without the threat of a deadline?
Well, the nature of creator owned and the beauty of working with Image is that you can set your own schedule as needed. Like Image is not going to hold you to a publishing schedule, which can be complicated for Image, of course, because they have to operate on a
Yeah.
level of commerce where they need product to sell. But for us, it means we're going to simply work and, continue working. Uh, if we were doing a comic for Marvel and Michael needed to take longer than, say he has 6 weeks to do an issue, but he needs to take 8 weeks, we would say, no, this is Marvel. That's impossible. It has to come out on a fixed schedule. If you can't draw it in 6 weeks, we're going to get someone else. And that sucks because you're going to get comics that are like chopped up and butchered, and it's unfortunate, and it means that an artist can't really have ownership of a work if it isn't entirely theirs. So mercifully, we don't have to resort to that. The flip side is that when Michael or Greg, when anyone has any kind of requirement where they have to take more time for something, then we simply take it, which is good and bad both. During the course of producing this comic, it should come as no surprise. Obviously, there was the issue of the pandemic to deal with. It was very
Hmm.
hard to, we started working on this in like 2022, 2021, 2022. It was kind of hard to deal with day-to-day life. It was still difficult to deal with, people having kids in school. At one point during that time, Michael um, moved to the UK, which you could imagine is very disruptive, that he
Hmm.
has to spend a lot of time packing and traveling and getting a visa and finding a new place to live and doing all of that stuff. Things like that, overall. We also had Hollywood strikes where Greg, in his capacity as a screenwriter, was on strike, walking picket lines, trying to figure out where income was going to come from. Greg doesn't make money from writing comics until after the comics have sold, and if his other line of work is completely suspended, he's out there basically walking a picket line and trying to figure out what's next and how to operate his business, how to bring in his own income. all of those things, it would seem like they would make things easier because it's more time to write on comics, but no, it only made it harder. It was extremely disruptive. So all of that stuff contributed to delays, but at the same time, Greg was writing ahead, turning in scripts. Michael was chipping away at it. And as you mentioned, as you cited from Greg, we didn't want to start putting out the comic because a lot of times what happens also is that you put out the first arc and you think you're working far enough ahead not to get caught up in the second arc. But then inevitably it's like, oh, somebody got sick, somebody got COVID and they were waylaid for 3 weeks or whatever,
Yeah.
which happened during the last several years. Or, um, people have injuries, people have family emergencies, these things happen. And then the next thing you know, it's like you thought you were working ahead and suddenly you're 6 months behind and now you're on another delayed arc. So we wanted to make really sure to work very, very far ahead. And at this point, one of the things I did was develop a schedule all along for how far Michael would have to work ahead. And I have this schedule, I'm looking at it right now, where I have each issue number and then a due date for Michael to turn in pages. And then I have kind of the when it would be due to Image and when the on sale date would be. And I had that for 20 issues, broken down for 20 issues,
Hmm.
which is really wild to kind of look at a calendar and be like, oh, I'm going to still be doing this comic for the next 2.5, 3 years. Or, like, oh, we're going to be drawing this comic until 2027. Um, but it's incredible too, because there's and when I say the Image due date, we don't have the Image due dates yet. That's me projecting when they would be based on when we want the comic to be out on sale. So at one point we figured that we would launch in June of this year. Then we started planning out on sale dates based on that, roughly every, once a month per arc with built-in breaks so that we could win back some time. And I built up the schedule for 20 issues, and it's daunting. It's kind of daunting to like look down the barrel of that much work for that far ahead, but it's also very liberating because it's like we can start to track where we're ahead, we can track where we're falling behind. Sometimes I can give Michael a warning of like we literally have like 3 weeks left in this arc before we start eating into time for the next arc, etc. Things like that.
Yeah.
So that was a lot of work um, to get us on this. And at this point, we are, as I said, we're working on the third arc now, and we still have ample lead time. It really looks like we're going to do all 4 arcs as planned. So fingers crossed. Let's not let's not get to a situation where we play this back and I kick myself like,
I'm not going to
why
jinx you
do
on
I
this.
always say that?
Did you have to, at any point, have to? I know I've talked a few times about creator owned versus, working for Marvel or DC, where you are the boss and work for hire as an editor. With creator owned, it's a little more, it's different. But because you're so far in the future, but you also have to keep to deadlines to be able to see this book through. Who's been responsible for saying no, that you have to, you guys have to stick to this deadline? Are these guys basically, they understand, are they self-regulating, or were you in that position?
Well, it's a little tricky because it's like the deadline is the stick. There's a carrot and a stick, and the deadline is the stick, but there's not really a punishment. There's no
Yeah.
stakes there's no real stick to it except for the abstract concept of if we don't finish this book, then we don't put it out. Then
And you
like
don't
one
get
thing that I
paid.
know Michael,
You
yeah,
know,
or even like one thing Michael was very frustrated by that he was trying to overcome is that, we weren't on the stands for 3 years, then that's like out of sight, out of mind,
mhm.
that if Lazarus isn't coming out and Michael Art doesn't have any art out, new comics out on the stands, it's kind of it gives a feeling of like obsolescence, or
Oh yeah,
the
yeah.
feeling of like the comics industry has moved on and forgotten us, and that's a very demoralizing, very punishing feeling.
But it's
So
true.
that's kind of
It's
the only. that's kind of the only motivator. Sometimes it's like, come on, we got to get these books out.
Hmm.
We got to have more Lazarus out there.
I mean,
So that's basically it. Yeah, like in work for hire comics, you have the stick of if you don't hit the deadline, we'll replace you. But I mean, that's a threat, and nobody does their best work. I don't like having to threaten people. That's an aspect of editing that I was very happy to leave behind when I didn't
mhm.
have to do work for hire comics anymore. I don't like threatening people, and nobody likes to be threatened. And then creators end up resenting their editors or their publishers. And mercifully, we don't have that stuff. But then it also removes the stakes of some concrete reason why you have to, So every so often, Greg does need to take a longer period of time to finish a script, and he simply takes it uh, with no repercussions. Or Michael may need longer to finish an issue, and he simply takes it. And the challenge was building a schedule, working far enough ahead and building a schedule where we could allow for wiggle room for those things to happen and absorb. If there are any delays, then we can absorb them and still hit a schedule.
I mean,
And hopefully that's where we are now. The alarming part is when I look at the end of the schedule and I look at like, oh, issue 20, we're extremely comfortable all the way through issue, say like we're doing fine in reality, but if hypothetically like, oh no, Michael took 2 weeks longer on this issue, that means that come issue 19 or issue 20, it's going to be a little tight. So hopefully it doesn't come to that. But with breaks every so often, we absorb. It's like we absorb these delays and we keep the comics coming out monthly, and from my lips to God's ears.
um, one thing with so you've been working on this basically. The last issue of Risen was September 2022. So you guys, were wrapped it up a few months earlier. So since 2022 to now, for the last 3 years, you've been taking pages in, you've been taking covers in. Um, what issue number one of Fallen, as looking at an editor's point of view, was that completed and just sitting on your desk, or was there? How did you operate? Did you go, I have everything, and then I can hold on this you know, before we get into the pipeline of image? Or did you just make sure everything was done and you just, okay, it's done, I can move on, even though it's not going to the printer for 4 months or whatever? How did you manage
Yeah,
warehousing the work that these guys are doing? And just one thing, Michael's that concern that they're talking about of like, oh, I haven't seen an issue from Micah Lark in 3 years. I mean, that is a real concern in comics, that you just like that person disappeared, out of sight, out of mind. That for that is I understand that concern. That I've seen, we've all, you and I have both seen it, happen in comics, where somebody just drops out of off the face of the earth, and they're still working, but nobody remembers them or something. But how
I
did
mean,
you? Yeah,
I
go
also
ahead.
edit. I will address that question, but I just want to throw in a tangent. I also edit a comic called The Forged, that's written by Greg and Eric Troutman, and it's drawn by Mike Henderson. And that comic has been coming out for a couple of years. We're 3 arcs out, and we've had delays in between arcs on that one. And when we talk to retailers and even readers, people don't know. People don't know that it's still a going concern. Like fans come up to Greg at a con and they say, "What are you working on next?" And he says, "Well, I'm still doing The Forged." And they're like, "Oh, that's still coming out?" So like
No.
that's a very frustrating thing. That yeah, we're doing 2 more arcs of The Forged, and that's going to be the end of that series. Um, and of course, once it ends, then we can really start pushing. Like the whole thing is out there; you can go read all of it.
Hmm.
But in the meantime, we've put out 3 arcs in a couple of years, and it's very hard to get them on people's radar. So the out of sight, out of mind phenomenon is especially acute in that case. But yeah, to your question about the work, it's no, we simply bank it. Like
Hmm.
we had shared Dropbox folders, and I keep a very extensive set of files in my computer and an external hard drive and backed up on Dropbox. And we're basically just bringing in pages and getting them colored and getting them lettered, and then right now we just turned in issue number 2 to Image a couple of weeks ago. We should be doing the online printer approvals any day now. We turn in issue 3 to Image in a couple of weeks because these are the due dates for printing.
Hmm.
But the issues are otherwise like sitting here finished. We have, we're turning those in, but we have the next 2 like already lettered and essentially finished. And then several more beyond that are already colored. And then Michael is drawing more beyond that. So it's really just a matter of like we follow the workflow. We get the comics in, we get the pages in, we color them, we letter them, and then we simply sit on them until it's time to deliver them to Image. And we still keep fine tuning. We like the back matter parts where Greg writes an essay. That
Yeah.
stuff doesn't happen until the very last minute because it has to respond to the latest stuff he's commenting on, or because we're waiting for reader mail to come in or stuff like that. So we work on these issues right up until they're due to Image, but with the lead time that we're working with right now, it means that we are pretty much sitting on a number of finished issues that we're just going to start racking up, just racking them up and putting them out. It's kind of
Is
fun. It's rare to have things this far in advance in the pipeline, so that's a lot of fun. We're doing the same thing with the Forged right now, where we've had so many delays that we don't want to start putting out the last 2 arcs until we can put them out continuously, which means that we're now sitting on 4 out of 6 issues. We're sitting on 4 finished issues. Not finished, but drawn.
mhm.
We're sitting on 4 fully drawn issues and then 2 more, and then that's a wrap.
Has there ever been a temptation with this stuff banked to do some serious tweaking? Are the creators like, are
Sometimes
Greg?
there's a necessity.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay,
sometimes there's a necessity to do serious tweaking. Like I don't want to get too far behind the scenes, but like I said, we're about to turn in issue 3 of Lazarus into Image in the next couple of weeks. And just now in the last month, we kind of figured something out from working on later issues that we're like, oh, you know what? Actually, I just realized I'm talking about a spoiler, so I can't even go into detail. But there's a sequence in the next issue we deliver is issue 3, and there's a sequence in there that we drew and colored a certain way, and then we went much further down the line of issues, and then in hindsight we realized, oh, this we really should revisit that and change it because we figured it out later. So an issue of Lazarus that was actually fully colored like 2 years ago has now gone back for 10 pages of not for like 5 pages, 6 pages of recoloring. So that was purely out of necessity. Luckily, because we had the lead time, we were able to figure that out and revisit it before it was locked and canonical by being in print. We try if it's a whim, if it's arbitrary, we would try to avoid it because you don't want to be noodling on these things until the end of time. But you also want to get it as close to perfect as you can. So, um, once the book gets lettered, it's usually pretty much final. The lettering, we're not rewriting the lettering. That would be very unfair to the letterer, to Ariana Mar is the letterer in this case. But there are writers and there are editors who will get a lettered proof of a comic and then start reworking extensively, start rewriting dialogue. And that's a very shitty thing to do because the poor letterer then ends up having to do a bunch of work for free. It effectively reduces their page rate. The more work they have to do on something, they're not getting paid any extra for it. Um, that's a crummy thing to do. So we avoid that. Once the lettering is in, we try to make it as locked as possible. Sometimes you still have to correct a few things, but we keep that to necessity. The same thing with the colors. We try to lock the colors as fast as possible and then put it to bed. Um, if there's any tweaking, it's like back matter, or a rare case like this where we realize something we needed to correct and then we go back and try to correct it. So Santiago Arcas, our colorist, had to revisit pages that he finished 2 years ago to
Oh,
to redo
geez.
the approach to this one thing. So that was unusual, but that's collaboration. We talked with him and we said, we're sorry to ask for this so late, but we kind of came up with this solution later, and we have a chance to incorporate it here. So Um, that was a very unusual case. We don't do things like that. Uh, I think it's highly unprofessional to have to do things like that on a regular basis. It would be very unfair to your collaborators to do things like that on a regular basis. But it came up on this issue, and it was such an unusual circumstance, um, that we felt if we still have a chance to fix it, then let's fix it. So that was, yeah, that was a rare thing.
So in the 3 years that has been there, did even to go further back compared to the mechanics that we've been talking about, but did you work with like Greg and Michael regarding, okay, we're going to sit down and do this? Or were you involved in the conversation of like the last arc of like how are we going to get once we come back? How are we going to get to the end? Was there a lot of planning or discussion about let's lock down our ending no matter what happens? Because I feel that at times Lazarus has been influenced a bit by what's going on in the real world. From what I've read, in the back matter and stuff, that Greg definitely and Michael have a vision of this world and where they want to be when they wrap it up. I mean, I guess I'm going further back of like, how do we prep for entering the last arc and how do we lock things down so we're
Hmm.
not sort of influenced by outside forces? Was that a conversation you
Hmm.
were part of or made sure happened as the editor?
Yes. Let me just quickly correct something. I was saying that those color pages were finished 3 years ago. I was wrong. It was 2 years ago.
Two
But
years.
anyway,
Okay.
to answer your question, yes, Greg and Michael definitely have an ending. That was always the plan. But, as Greg always puts it, not just in this comic, but in other comics like Black Magic is
Hmm.
the same. He has an outline that includes an ending, but the steps along the way to get there might change depending on whatever circumstances, ideas change. In the case of Lazarus, something I remember very palpably was the ending is the ending. The story is always moving in this direction. We know where it's going to go. But as the world around us really kind of warped and became more similar to the dystopian world of Lazarus, it was inevitable that Greg had a lot of anxiety and a lot of anger about the shit that's going on all around us. And that started to show in the comic where even though the story itself isn't changing, the execution is is being very colored um, by a pandemic and by authoritarianism and by jackbooted, state forces in the street. And that kind of starts to show itself. I mean, in particular, the biggest example is Lazarus Risen number 7, I think it was, or number 6, when Malcolm has his big speech about how broken the world was and why he had to step in and, appoint himself as savior of humankind.
Hmm.
But the speech that Malcolm gives is literally just a description of our world today. Like that was Greg like indulging in oh my God, we are living in the world of Lazarus, and it's really troubling, and it's really messed up. And you can see that if you read those last couple of issues, and Malcolm gives that speech, and it's just basically like describing what's going on in the first Trump administration, or overall in the present. It's like, oh my God, it's the anxiety and the aggravation and the frustration and the anger that we all feel is like poured into that. So yeah, we do frequently have conversations about like how the execution of the story might turn this way and that, based on whatever we're all going through. It is it is art, so it's a living thing that, in the process of writing it responds. An issue of Lazarus that Greg wrote in 2014 is obviously not going to be this. If he were to write Lazarus number 5 today, it would not be the same as he wrote it back in 2014 or 2013. It would be a very, very, very different thing because it responds to whatever is in the air at that moment. But all of that said, the outline is continuous. The outline is constant.
Yeah.
And every so often we do kind of revisit it and talk about the plan. And in the case of right now, the reason that we have set 20 issues as the target is because Greg outlined everything that has to happen to bring this to a close, and he put it at 20 issues. And the reason I've been kind of, I've been a little slippery about saying it's going to be about 20 issues is that as we get closer to the end, depending on how much stuff still has to happen or how much time we have left, Greg might decide to do a couple of more issues, or he might decide to make the issues in the final arc double sized or whatever, stuff like that, because that's all responding to necessity in the moment, in the creative process. But overall, the plan is the plan. Like
Mhm.
we stick to the plan in the broad strokes and then adjust along the way as we need to.
I guess I could talk for another hour about Lazarus. I am just, once again, so thrilled to have it back. Comic book reading for the next 2 years. It will be high on the list as I get it.
I mean, I will say this. I'll say this as a fan myself. The fact that we have so many issues ready to go means that a few days ago I was just rereading lettering proofs. Like I read a bunch of them in a row,
Mhm.
and I was like, "Oh my God, this is so cool!
I
This stuff
know.
is so cool!" Like the twist that the story is going to take in the next few issues, in this first arc of Fallen, the twists are going to be so huge, and it's really exciting. And for me as a fan, I was reading, the 5 issues, 6 issues, and I'm like, "Oh, this is so awesome!" So
Is
yeah, it's going to be a good time.
is there anything else you would like to say before we sign off regarding editing with Greg and Michael regarding this unique journey of publishing the series and bringing it to an end?
I mean, the main thing I would want to say is that we really love doing this comic, and times have been tough, really, in the last few years for everyone for obvious reasons. But they've been really tough for like the comics business, for the comics selling business, like for shops. So the most important thing I would urge people to do is, if you're interested in Lazarus, is to please pre-order. Um, the whole, I think we've got what, 4 issues on solicit now. 4 issues have been solicited, or five, or I think 4. So like, if people are into Lazarus, call a comic shop, pre-order it, put it on a pull list, get every issue in. That would be a huge, huge, huge help. That's like the best way to support Greg and Michael and the whole team. Otherwise, that's it. Check out Lake Yellowwood Slaughter on Kickstarter. You could still get a copy, still get cool stuff like a T-shirt and a cassette. And yeah, onward and upward.
Well, hey, Alejandro, I appreciate you coming on. It's been a little while, but love the work that you're doing. So it's awesome. I'm
Thank
looking
you.
forward
Thank
to
you again
everything.
so much for having me.
So
Yeah, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you.
thanks. I'd say stay cool. The hate wave is finally abated a bit. So
It is broken.
I will. I'll be talking to you, and it's everything looks great. So I'm really excited to see everything that we've talked about. I can't wait to see the finished product on everything. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Francis.
You're welcome. I'll talk to you later.